I believe that the Russians cannot stop at Ukraine, that Ukraine is merely one battle of this conflict. The international banking cartel, which is also behind the war in Ukraine and all the attempts to destabilize and regime change Russia and to partition it, because they will not stop.
Hi, everyone. This is Sean Ring here, editor of The Rude Awakening. Welcome back to Paradigm Press's video series. I am joined today by my friend Alex Krainer. Alex is a genuine Renaissance man. He started in the Croatian army and then wound up in Monaco as a financial analyst, was a hedge fund manager for a while. He developed the I system of trading using the method of trend following, which we're going to talk about a lot. And after that, or even during that, Alex wrote three fantastic books. One's called Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. The other is called Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading. And his third one, which is The Real Onion, is Grand Deception about Bill Browder and the Russian disinformation campaign beginning way back before anyone thought it was beginning, which have been banned by Amazon. So we have a real life genuine freedom fighter on the call tonight, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have him. Alex, thank you for joining us. How are you?
It's a pleasure, Sean. Good to be with you, and thank you for having me.
Brilliant stuff. I just I'm fascinated by journeys. I grew up in the United States and wound up leaving and never going back. You started out in the former Yugoslavia before it really was Croatia. You served in the Croatian army during the war, which I read. I thought is amazing. And then you wound up in Monaco. Can you take us through that journey real quick before we get into the markets?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, I was born in Yugoslavia in 1970, back when it was a socialist country under one-party communist rule, and that's where I grew up. And when I was a teenager, I had this ambition to go on a student exchange program to the United States. So that's what I did when I was 17. I ended up in California, going to high school, and so I ended up living in California for 3 years. I started going to university there, but then I had this. I kind of missed the old world, and I decided to transfer to a European university in Switzerland the last 2 years of my university studies. So I spent 2 years in Switzerland, and then I fell in love with a Venezuelan woman. So I ended up in Venezuela in 1993. Um, and I lived in Venezuela for a little longer than a year. My relationship, my love life fell apart, so it didn't work out. And then I thought, like, all right, my country's at war. Maybe there's going to be opportunities for me to do stuff there. But I had to get my military service out of the way, so I came back to Croatia in 1994. I volunteered for military service. The war ended in at the end of 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So I served for a year in during the war, and when I when I was discharged at the end of 1995, which was, like, by then the hostilities had ended. I didn't really know what to do with myself. The economy was depressed. There wasn't really much opportunity to do anything in Croatia, and it just, happened that I, had an opportunity to go into to oil trading, commodities trading business, based out of Geneva. They were opening an office in Monaco, and then the fact that I spoke fluent Spanish and fluent Croatian somehow helped me land a job there. So in 1996, I end up living in Monaco. I fully expected that I would be there for, a year or two max. But then one thing led to another, and I never left. I'm still based out of Monaco. I travel I spend a lot of time in Croatia because part of my business is here. But basically, my main residence is in Monaco, and I have to say I've grown to enjoy it very much. And of all the places where I've lived in my life, which includes, Venezuela and Croatia and Yugoslavia and Italy and the UK and so forth, I think that when you put together all the elements that make up quality of life, I think that Monaco, in my experience, scores by far the highest.
When you get to Monaco and you're working for these oil traders, most of these traders, if they're speculating, are trend following. Are they not? Are they employing a bunch of different strategies? How did you stumble upon trend following? And then we'll talk a bit of, in fact, could you define trend following?
This research was going on in the late 1990s. And if you remember, that was the time of the dot-com boom. And that was also the time when the price of oil went from, let's say, mid to low $20 per barrel to single digits. It fell below $10 a barrel in 1998. And it was a very peculiar point in time because I sat in this trading office with all these senior traders who knew everything about everything, and they were talking to the brokers all day and to the bankers. And so, the themes I kept hearing about was that price of oil had to go up higher, much, much higher, because, like the economy was growing on all full cylinders. Capital was gravitating towards technology stocks and internet and pharmaceuticals, and the oil exploration and refinement were getting much, much less of capital expenditure. And so we saw that demand would rise because the economy was growing so strongly, and that the supplies would be curtailed. And so everybody in the industry knew that oil prices could go nowhere but higher. And then at the same time, I listened to endless chatter about how insanely overvalued stock prices were, and that it's a massive bubble, and that it's all going to come crashing down. And I actually remember that chatter was basically unchanged between 1996 and 2000.
Yeah.
If you remember, it was December 1996 when Alan Greenspan faced Congress and said his speech about irrational exuberance. Mm-hmm. Well, from that speech until the peak of the dot-com boom, the NASDAQ tripled. And just during the last 5 months of the NASDAQ bubble, the stock prices more than doubled. In the last 5 months, the NASDAQ rose by 110%. Yep. And so here I was with my team of analysts, barely knowing what we were doing. But, we had these trends in our face. Oil prices, in spite of the fact that everybody knew that oil prices had to go higher and everybody in the industry was banging that same drum, the oil prices went from the 20s in 1997 to $9 a barrel at the end of 98 or beginning of 99, I don't remember. And so we were all wrong for over a year. And then with the dot-com bubble, they were all wrong. I didn't really have a strong opinion, but they were all wrong for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so, I told my guys, well, we are trying very, very hard to predict things that we kind of know that we cannot predict. But we can see that markets are moving in trends. So why don't we look into, what are trends and how we can maybe navigate them in some systematic way, so that we can make more when we're right than we lose when we're wrong. We came up with 6 tentative definitions of what a trend is. We built algorithms around them, driven by parameters. And then we created some kind of a neural network that would generate a judgment of market trends for basically any time series that you fed into it. And then, once we had that, then we added trading strategies on top of that. So if you're in an uptrend, then you could define the entry and exit signals so that you take advantage of pullbacks or breakouts. And then when you have maybe an unusually strong move in your favor, that you take profits or that you have stop losses and things like that. So that was like a double, like a dual neural network that would do all this work on a daily basis for any individual market. And by the time we had this prototype completed, it was a bit of a maintenance nightmare, but it was clear to me that its applicability went beyond the oil market and the needs of my company.
But you mentioned something while we were talking in the green room. You hate trading. Like I've heard that from options traders. I've heard that from futures traders. I used to be a future broker. You hate trading. How do we get around? And I'm pretty sure most of the people watching this don't want to trade. They just want to make money. So how do you reconcile that? How did you kind of come together and build this company that you built and the system that you built?
With the in 2020, with the pandemic and everything that happened, my hedge fund career came to an abrupt end. And already during my hedge fund career, I was trying to persuade some of my investors that, like it would be, I really didn't want to do any more trading and money management. What I wanted to do is provide these, portfolio solutions, these engines to people who could be more effective as money managers and who could be, I have to confess, I've never been very successful at selling myself, because when you're a money manager, it's one thing to generate performance. It's a completely different thing to sell yourself as a money manager and to attract investors into your funds. I wasn't particularly good at that. And so I thought that I would be better able to scale my business if I just offered, position myself as a solution provider and then let people who are good at other things use those solutions and create, successful investment management businesses out of that. And so, my trading and hedge fund management career was forced to an end in 2020 with the, coinciding with the lockdowns, though not necessarily caused by the lockdowns. And then I decided, well, all right, fine, that's it. So now I got a big kick in the butt from life, and now is the time for me to try to do what I think I should be doing. Because, like when I was managing money, I thought like, well, this would be nice, but it's not very likely to succeed. And so you just continue doing what pays the bills. Mm-hmm. And so in 2020, I was forced to rethink and how do you call it? I was forced to build back better. And
oh, the algo picked that up. Good.
And so, I basically started working on developing this business. Part of where I also get personal satisfaction out of this is because I've been deliberately trying to develop products for the retail investor. Because, as a hedge fund manager, you're always, like you're taking money from rich people who want to be even richer. And, something about it is a little bit hollow, it's like, sure. Like, what am I doing? I'm clicking on my mouse all day and speculating on the market, and I'm, helping people with a lot of money make a little bit more money. But, my speciality, the trend following and trading commodities futures is, and this is an empirical fact, I'm not telling you my opinion, is far and away the best way to hedge against inflation. And the people who suffer the greatest risk and the greatest harm from inflation are the ordinary people.
That's right.
And so wouldn't it be nice to be able to help ordinary people protect themselves from inflation a little bit?
You've got Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading. You've got your Trend Following Bible. They're now free. aren't they? So they're downloadable, they're free right from your website. How would that, reading your books, did you do that as marketing or did you do that as a how-to guide? Like what was behind just writing the books? And then obviously we could talk a little bit about Amazon afterwards.
The whole challenge of mastering uncertainty in commodities trading and investment management made a hell of a lot of sense to me, but it was mambo jumbo to almost everybody else in my life. So I kind of felt the need to try to explain the to put it down on paper so that I can convey why certain things are important and what it is that I've done and accomplished in my life. And so I kind of, that was simply on my to-do list. I'd never thought that this would be a book that would be a bestseller, that like it's a niche thing that maybe like 6 people in the world would be interested in reading, but I needed to do it for myself. um the the trend following Bible I published 2 years ago in 2021, and that's actually not a that's actually a similar book, but it just like tackles the problem matter from a different angle. And the reason why I wanted to write it is because I've noticed that trend following as a generic strategy of speculation is actually very obscure to most people. Particularly the experts in the industry, because like you do fundamental analysis of supply and demand, and you try to forecast the changes in the market and position yourself and identify value and all these things. Except that like I've done 25 years of deep and broad research into all these problems, and I can state with a great deal of certainty and conviction that they're all wrong. because like, first of all, you can't predict anything. You cannot predict the price of anything tomorrow, let alone a week from now, let alone a year from now or 5 years from now. So things are unpredictable. However closely you study markets, and I started as a market analyst. Like I read the in the oil markets, I read all the supply demand statistics from the Energy International Agency, from the Department of Energy in the United States, from OPEC, from like different research institutions and investment banks. And we had no idea, like we were as likely to be wrong as we were to be right. It was just like a 50-50 thing. And then by the time you add the transaction costs and all of this, you always kind of ended up losing. And statistically, we now have like an ocean of empirical data that most active investment managers by far, and by active I mean people who actively trade rather than just following an index like S&P 500 or FTSE or whatever, that most of them by far lose money. And basically what it boils down to, that in any given year, about 2/3 of active investment managers underperform their benchmarks. And over longer periods of time, like 5-10 years, 90% and above actually underperform their benchmarks. So all that education, learning, study, research, forecasts actually destroy value rather than add value. Whereas trend following is a very legitimate approach to trading markets, because what I can also demonstrate is that far and away the most powerful driver of investment performance are the large scale price events. Like when you see Bitcoin go up 200% per year for 12 years and generate millions of percent. Okay, this happens. We've seen Tesla over the space of about 12 years between 2010 and 2022 appreciate by, I think, something like 380 times. We saw similar price trajectories from Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, LVMH, um, many companies. And we see the same phenomena in commodities markets, like where, I don't know, in the 1970s, gold went up from $35 an ounce in 1971 to $850 an ounce in 1980. And then silver went up something like 50 times over the same space. And we see oil regularly, sometimes it collapses by 60, 70, 80%, and then it quadruples over the next 4 months. So these trends, even 2000 years ago, Sun Tzu, in his famous Art of War, wrote that there are three main avenues of opportunity in life: events, trends, and conditions. So even 2000 years ago, trends were observed as a means, as a way of opportunity. And so if you develop effective, reliable, high quality trend following strategies, you no longer have to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. Not only that, you're trading time series, whether it's stocks or bonds or oil or copper or coffee beans or soybeans, you are trading those curves. So trend following also allows you to diversify into markets that you don't necessarily know anything about. And for 15 years, I've been trading in over 50 different financial and commodities markets. And I can confess that I don't know the first thing about most of them. Like I traded wheat. I don't know. I only know that you use it for making bread. I traded frozen orange juice. I traded copper and gold and crude oil. I don't know anything about those markets. I only have an algorithm that tells me if the trend seems to be moving up, we go long. If it seems to be going down, we go short. And if you do that with good risk management, meaning you don't overexpose yourself, you don't gamble, you drive it in the slow lane, let's put it that way, and you apply a great deal of discipline and patience, then you can outperform other investors and many benchmarks, like the stock markets, the 60/40 stock bond portfolios and things like that. And I know a few dozen CTAs, commodities trading advisor, who use systematic trend following, who have been able to outperform the broad stock indices for 30, 40 years in continuation. So that is possible. And then, then you don't have to work so hard to try to predict where the stocks are going, what's Jerome Powell going to say tomorrow, how are the markets going to react to Jerome Powell, what if OPEC does that, what if Joe Biden does the other thing. And then it becomes easier to generate decisions.
With all of what you said, you've written a book called The Brown Grand Deception. You wade into politics. You have very strong opinions. I've watched so many YouTube videos. They're fascinating. You also said something, because I have a British passport because I lived in England for roughly 10 years. You said quite a few things, and it's all packaged together. I don't even know which way to cut into it, but let's start with the first one. Do the British really run America? Do you really believe that? Can you explain that a little bit? You say everything comes out of the city of London. We always think Washington runs the world. Could you just add a little color to that? I'm fascinated by that comment.
Yes, that's actually quite difficult to do, because the British establishment goes way out of their way to conceal their hand, to make it seem that Washington's running things. Washington, the United States, like today, if you look at things on their face, the United States is the global hegemon. They are running things. They are invading countries, imposing sanctions. The dollar is the reserve currency, is the dominant trade currency of the world. They coerce other nations to, submit to their diktat and all of that, However, the United States is not a monolith, and let's say there's an imperial globalist establishment there, and then there's people who are more interested in making things work right for the United States domestically, and that's a bit of a silent civil war going on within the United States. And this globalist imperialist establishment is very much connected to the British foreign policy establishment, and they actually, it's not all that secret if you pay attention. Like if you read the articles and papers published in by the Trilateral Commission, by Council of Foreign Relations, by the Chatham House in London, the former Royal Institute for International Affairs or something like this.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They basically kind of call themselves the transatlantic community, because that's the connection. Basically, what happened is that when the British Empire started to decay, and let's define the empire first. The empire, our curriculum tends to conflate empires and nations. So we had the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, Roman Empire, British Empire, and so forth. But it's not a national project. The empire is always a network of vested community, a network of vested interests that kind of infiltrate and co-opt a nation's political, diplomatic, military structures, and then they help themselves to the wealth and prosperity of that nation to basically pursue their own agenda. Right. And their own agenda is always economic exploitation of colonies for their resources and their labor. And so this kind of an arrangement in which these imperial structures of power are a parasite in a nation, they end up, like all parasites, they end up weakening and depleting the host, and then they need a new host. So when the British Empire started to decay at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, then they had a big problem. What now? And for over a space of a decade or two, at the end of the 19th century and beginning of 20th, the round tables, the round tables of the British realm had these discussion of how to carry on, how to continue the empire that they were losing control, and they made a decision of bringing the United States in and actually infiltrating the United States and its diplomatic and military and political structures, in order to be able to take advantage of the wealth and power of the United States to continue their agenda. And this is how the United States became the reincarnation of the British Empire. But the spiritual and philosophical home base, the mothership is still London. And if you pay very close attention, it becomes clearer and clearer. The more you observe, the more you see that it's the main decisions are being made in London, and that it's the British establishment that is more. Look at the Ukraine war.
Hmm.
The British are the most committed and the most invested in that war. The Americans are kind of like, they're doing it, but it's not so, like they're not quite as keen. And then remember
Certainly not
when,
the population. Yeah.
yeah, and then when in April, in March and April last year, when with Turkish intermediation, the Russians and the Ukrainians came to the point of almost signing a peace deal.
Right.
And under the terms of that peace deal, the Russians were actually going to completely withdraw from the territory of Ukraine. It was who parachuted into Kiev
Boris
and
Johnson.
made
Yeah.
sure it was Boris Johnson. And like I don't know for what reason, but in the media it was all like, oh yeah, Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson, as though Joe Biden couldn't have sent Antony Blinken or Victoria Nuland, or he couldn't have gone there himself. He's been to Kiev many, many times, or he doesn't have an ambassador in Kiev who could have talked to Zelensky. No, it was Boris Johnson. That's very odd. And then like we all remember when Nord Stream pipelines blew up, that within a minute of that happening, that it was British Prime Minister Liz Truss who texted Antony Blinken, the US
Yeah.
Secretary of State, to inform him that it's been done.
Mm.
So, but for some reason, that relationship is always very, very well hidden. And one of the great examples of it being hidden was Russiagate. Because if you'll recall, Russiagate was practically completely cooked up between the Democratic National Congress and the London establishment, between the Foreign Office and MI6.
Mm.
So Christopher Steele, who
Right.
drafted the dossier,
Mm.
was a former MI6 agent. His superior was Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6. Then you had Joseph Mifsud, who was another clandestine MI6 asset. Then you had, Alexander Downer. He was Australian, but part of the
Australian.
Five
Yep.
Eyes. But practically everybody involved, other than the Clinton election machinery, the DNC, everybody was a British asset.
Hmm.
And
It's
then
true.
like in the media, uh, the Fox News covered this quite well, particularly Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity was on that story practically every day, and he was speaking as a pretty much as a biased supporter of Donald Trump. But nevertheless, he made sure not to highlight the role of the British in Russiagate. So he would always bang every day, he would repeat practically 10 times Russian lies, Russian disinformation. But then when he talked about the British, people who drafted the dossier, he would say the dossier drafted by foreign nationals. He would never say the British. He would always say the
Mm.
foreign nationals.
Right.
So, it was clear that there must be some kind of a fatwa there that thou shalt not mention
Yeah.
London. Whereas, like the more you observe, the more you see that all roads do lead to London.
That's interesting. And what do you think is going to happen? Now, Poland has just said they're not going to send arms to Ukraine. It seems like support now, like you said, is really starting to unravel. Where do you see this going? If we can spot a trend over the next 3 to 6 months, do you think it's gonna, is Russia going to now take advantage of this, or are they going to pull back and hopefully make peace? Do you have any idea where you think it's going?
Yeah, I do, but I have to speculate because obviously they're not telling me. Vladimir Putin hasn't been sending his usual checks. But like if I observe the events and I try to read between the lines, the statements from Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov and their discussions with their Chinese allies, and what is going on, and knowing the history of these relationships, I believe that the Russians cannot stop at Ukraine. that Ukraine is merely one battle of this conflict. Russia has endured at least 4 invasions from Western powers over the last 300 or 400 years. We had Poland in the 1600s. We had Sweden 300 years ago. We had Napoleon in the early 1800s, and we had Hitler. And then, we had the Bolshevik coup, which was basically a Western-sponsored color revolution, which actually succeeded, which caught the Russians unaware. We had the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, which was also a Western-sponsored assassination to behead the Russian traditional 1,000-year Tsarist system. So, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because Russia is a huge country. It's a treasure trove of resources and energy reserves, lumber, arable land, aluminum, iron, rare earth minerals, diamonds, you name it. It's a massive treasure trove of wealth.
Yeah.
And all that wealth, together with 140 some million well-educated, well-formed labor force, that's tremendous collateral, which would be much, much more useful if it were controlled by Western financial institutions. And so we don't quite like that the Russians are sitting on our resources, and that they won't let Western corporations extract them and develop them and turn them into financial flows that accumulate financial wealth in the Western centers of powers, and instead they selfishly use those resources for their own purposes. So it's been a centuries-old wet dreams of Western centers of power, London, Paris, Berlin, Washington, to try to regime change Russia, to install some kind of, Volodymyr Zelensky or Juan Guaido there, who would do what we tell them to do, like Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s.
Right. So what's the next move?
So here's what I think, and you mentioned my book. The title of my book is Grand Deception: The Truth About Bill Browder, Magnitsky Act, and Anti-Russian Sanctions. So the Magnitsky Act is another thing that isn't exactly how do you call it, household term for most people, but Magnitsky Act was lobbied through the United States Congress in December 2012. And it's deemed as the opening salvo of the new Cold War. Ostensibly, it's an act that is protective of human rights around the world, that would sanction human rights abusers, primarily in Russia, but then it was extended to include any country that they choose. But what it actually is first of all, it's an abomination in from the perspective of Western legal traditions, because people can be sanctioned with no due process whatsoever. Simply, it provides that a bureaucrat from the United States Treasury Department, at their discretion, can place people on Magnitsky list, people and companies, anybody they choose, and there's no recourse. So if they decide that you are a Putin puppet and they don't like the looks of you, they can put you on the Magnitsky list, and like any of your U.S. assets can be frozen and confiscated. You would be unable to obtain a travel visa to go to the United States, conduct business with U.S. entities, and that can be very, very debilitating to ordinary people and business people. But where it actually is quite destructive is in terms of, let's say, legal cooperation between Russia and Western jurisdictions. So what happened in the 1990s during the Russia's transition from communism to capitalism under Boris Yeltsin, whom we loved, was that literally trillions of dollars of Russia's wealth have been plundered and spirited through offshore centers to Western financiers and investors. And so a lot of this was done illegally and through shockingly corrupt schemes that were going on under Yeltsin's rule to the benefit of Western investors. And the Russians have prepared extensive investigations and court cases that they wanted to bring, in jurisdictions like, in places like London, Cyprus, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Zurich, Geneva, New York, and so forth, where, they could, hire lawyers, begin the discovering process, start to depose the suspects and the witnesses, and then create a document trail, because their intent is to trace the stolen assets to their ultimate beneficiaries and to recover them. And so now with the Magnitsky Act, the Western jurisdiction can simply erect barriers to this cooperation and prevent any Russian lawyer, private individual, or government entity from beginning this discovery process through Western jurisdictions. And so, why am I telling you this whole thing? You asked me, where is this going? I think that the logic of the current conflict kind of imposes on Russia to go all the way, because they don't want to stop in Ukraine and then set themselves up for another invasion from the West, because these things have been going periodically for centuries. Instead, I think that the Russians want to unmask and disenfranchise this oligarchy in the West that is practically the moving principle behind hostility between West and Russia. And I think that the way they intend to do this is by probably applying pressure diplomatically for all these Magnitsky legislations in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, wherever they've been enacted, in Canada, to be reversed, and then to pursue this conflict further through judicial means to, first of all, to recover the stolen assets from Russia, and then to unmask the ultimate beneficiaries, which is, the Western financial oligarchy, basically the international banking cartel, which is also behind the war in Ukraine and all the attempts to destabilize and regime change Russia and to partition it, because they will not stop. Maybe they lose the battle in Russia, but then they're going to try to spark some destabilizing conflicts in, I don't know, like Armenia and Azerbaijan, or maybe they're going to try to use Turkey as a destabilizing, or Moldova, or Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. There are enough many crisis points and potential detonators to continue attacking Russia and destabilizing it. And so I think that the Russians have to go all the way. But I think that as the military conflict in Ukraine winds down, the conflict will continue by other means, through Western diplomacy, jurisdictions, and so forth.
Wow, that's just amazing. My goodness, what an amazing conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with? Any thoughts about what's besides Russia and all that, what's coming in the markets thanks to all of these machinations over the next, till the end of the year? The Fed held steady. Bank of England held steady. What do you think's coming over the next 3 to 6 months in the markets, maybe?
Well, if you say 3 to 6 months, my answer is I have no idea.
No
But
idea.
longer term,
Fair
longer
enough.
term, I think that inevitably we're facing an inflationary future. I think that inevitably the interest rates in Europe, UK, Japan, and the United States, well, most Western, G7, G20 economies, Italy, Poland, Norway, you name it, they're going to be facing rising interest rates. They're going to have one recourse, and that's going to be the printing press. And that leads to an inflationary future. And I think that we're also looking for a variety of reasons. One of them is this recourse to the printing presses. We're going to be looking at a commodity super cycle, which is not going to last 3 to 6 months. It's going to, it's expected to last anything between 10 and 25 years. And the commodity super cycle, is going to unfold because as the fiat currencies lose purchasing power, clearly the prices of things like energy, metals, agricultural products are going to be rising. And it's a world of trouble. It's a world of trouble, and a very, very significant headwinds for Western, not only investors, but ordinary people who live off of their salaries or pensions and fixed income. And so people have to try to deliberately build some resilience into their setup, into their lives. And how to achieve that, that's not so easy. Let's say that large investors, it's easier for them because it's easier for them to move money to different jurisdictions, to to invest into commodities, hedge funds, and so forth. For ordinary people, I think that one thing that's important to do is to scale down your overhead, to try to reduce your expenses, your rent, to acquire some physical gold and silver bullion that you might need to rely on in a crisis when maybe the money the money vanishes, to be able to maybe bribe corrupt government bureaucrats for this and that reason, which is things that happen in crises. People who should think about acquiring a piece of land that they can use to grow crops. We're gonna grow some food, have chickens, eggs, potatoes, tomatoes, whatever, some fruit, and to try to. I think one of the most important things that all of us can do is to cultivate bonds and cooperation with other people in our communities. Because ultimately, nobody can be self-sufficient in and of themselves. You have to rely on people around you. So you have to know who knows how to fix cars, who can fix your roof, where you can get a dental appointment and pay maybe with a dozen eggs or things like that. It's extremely important for people to connect with their community and to maybe even formulate some strategies of survival and resilience. And another indicator of how important that is how zealous the government agencies are at making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. I was invited this year to speak at a conference in Ireland called Think Local. And they were barely able to organize this conference because the government agents tried everything they could to prevent the event from happening, to the point where they demonized the organizers in the Irish in the media in Ireland as extremists, conspiracy theorists, right wingers, whatever, big, whatever label they could use
Yeah.
to demonize them like they're monsters or something. And then they try to work out which venues they might use to organize the conference, and they went to these venues to pressure them to cancel the event, to the point where they had to actually organize the event at a fake venue, meaning, like they organized it in one venue, and then at that venue they would direct people to the real venue, the secret one. And so that way they were able to organize it in February, but then when they wanted to repeat the event in July, over the summer, the government actually managed to completely prevent the event from taking place. And you know what this is? This is just local people getting together, discussing, the problems they're facing and the potential solutions, and inviting some speakers over to provide a different perspective on things. All very nice, hardworking, law-abiding, ordinary people, citizens and payers of Ireland.
Mm.
But the government didn't want us to get together and talk between ourselves. So that's a strong indicator that that's exactly what we should be doing.
Yes,
Organizing local events with local community, discussing the problems, discussing the strategies of formulating solutions, and so that all, I think, is all important. And then it's also important to not be too concerned, because where we are today might even seem like a walk in the park when you think where the world was, say, in 1918 at the end of World War I, where everything seemed to have fallen apart. Tens of millions of people perished in the big war. Everything looked like the world has come to an end, but humanity prevailed. Most people survived, and then the whole everything rose back up from the ashes. And so this is going to happen again. Things are going to get better. We just have to kind of continue putting one foot in front of the other, think, question things, and forge ahead, knowing for sure that while some people might get hurt, some people will get hurt, most of us are going to come through, and then we're going to have the opportunity to maybe, build something better in its place, build back better.
Wonderful. Oh, and on that note, let's end it here. Thank you so much, Alex. Everybody who's watching, thank you for sticking with us until the end. I am putting all of Alex's links in the description. His books are excellent. He also has a load of other YouTube videos up there. And also his eye system for trend following is also on his website. You can check that out. I think that's still available for people. It's a wonderful system. Alex, thank you for joining us today. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
Sean, it was a great pleasure. Warm greetings to you and all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you.